March 12, 2026. Sheriff Chris Nanos told NBC News something that made everyone stop in their tracks. Investigators had known the motive behind Nancy Guthrie's disappearance from the very first hour. And for 48 days, through every piece of evidence, forensic analysis, and public silence, that belief never wavered. And at the same time, the FBI was still going door to door, talking to neighbors. They were asking about construction sites, workers in the area, and a suspicious vehicle spotted on Via Entrada at 10 a.m. on January 31st. 48 days. No suspects. No arrests. An 84-year-old woman still missing. And the only question left, what really happened to Nancy Guthrie? The man in charge of the investigation was telling the nation he had known why it happened from the start. Those two claims can't both be true in the way most people assume. Either the sheriff knew something and kept it hidden, or the word "knew" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that statement. But there's a third possibility, and it's the one the evidence actually supports. The FBI did the work. The FBI uncovered the evidence. And somewhere between what the Bureau found and what the public was told, a decision was made, a decision that cost the investigation precious, irreplaceable time. Stay with me. In the next 10 minutes, I'll show you exactly what the FBI discovered inside Nancy Guthrie's home, what they were blocked from doing with it, and why the gap between that evidence and an arrest is the real story of this case. And Nancy Guthrie had lived in the same house in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona for more than 50 years. The neighborhood stretches into the desert north of the city, with wide, quiet streets and houses set back behind driveways and landscaping that create natural privacy. At night, traffic is almost non-existent. The residents had lived there long enough to know each other's routines, and serious crime was simply not part of the conversation. That decades-long history of safety is exactly what made Nancy Guthrie vulnerable. She was 84 years old. According to Sheriff Nanos, she could not walk 50 yards on her own without assistance. As she had a pacemaker regulating her heartbeat and relied on daily cardiac medication, which her daughter Savannah described as essential to her survival. Not something she could skip. Not something that could wait. Missing a dose could trigger serious deterioration within hours. Yet mentally, she was sharp and aware. And Nancy was independent in all the ways that mattered. She watched church services online each week, following a congregation in New York that Savannah attended, zooming in from her living room rather than driving across Tucson. Neighbors told reporters she had been venturing out less in recent months, sometimes sparking worry when she was not seen. Yet on the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner at her daughter Annie's home. They played card games, an evening so ordinary it left no particular trace. Unremarkable, until it suddenly was. Annie's husband, Tommaso Cayenne, drove Nancy home. Surveillance footage confirmed the garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed at 9:50 p.m. Tommaso waited until Nancy was inside, then drove away. That was the last confirmed moment anyone in the family saw Nancy Guthrie safe. The next morning, a friend arrived for their weekly church live stream. Nancy did not answer the door. Calls went unanswered. Family members drove to the house. They searched the property, then around noon called 911. Deputies arrived at 12:15 p.m. What they saw at the front door made it immediately clear. This was not an elderly woman who had wandered off. The blood was the first sign, droplets at the front entrance, circular and contained, falling straight down without interruption. No footprints cut through them. No voids where a shoe had stepped between the drops. Nancy's Apple Watch was inside. Her cardiac medication sat on the counter. Her wallet untouched. Her phone left on the counter. But the doorbell camera that normally hung beside the front door was gone. Not broken. Not obscured. Physically removed at 1:48 a.m. That camera hadn't failed. It had been deliberately taken. A gloved hand had studied it, blocked the lens with vegetation from the garden bed, then detached the device entirely. The person responsible wore a full-face black ski mask, black gloves, light-colored pants, a dark jacket, and carried a black Ozark Trail 25L hiking pack. He had a holstered firearm strapped to the front of his body, centered on the chest, not the hip. A penlight was held between his teeth, leaving both hands free. He walked directly toward the camera with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. At 2:12 a.m., a second camera on the property registered motion, confirming movement. Though no video was recorded, the subscription tier didn't include it. At 2:28 a.m., the Bluetooth connection between Nancy's pacemaker and her iPhone dropped. Bluetooth works within roughly 30 feet. When the signal went silent, Nancy was no longer inside her home. She was outside, in a vehicle gone. From the camera removal to pacemaker silence, the window was 41 minutes. 8 minutes after the pacemaker went dark, a vehicle of unknown make and model appeared on a Ring camera 2.5 meters away. From that moment, the physical trail of Nancy Guthrie ends. But the blood on the porch was telling forensic experts a story only beginning to be understood. The FBI processed the crime scene and found something that answered one question while opening a far more difficult one. Inside Nancy's home, they collected DNA. Not Nancy's. Not belonging to any family member or known contact. DNA from strangers who had been physically inside the house during those 41 minutes. And not just one stranger, two. The sample was a mixed profile, genetic material from at least two unidentified individuals, layered together in a single collection. On March 12, 2026, Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed publicly in his NBC News interview that the mixed DNA samples from Nancy Guthrie's home were creating major technical challenges. Resolving them, he said, could take weeks, months, or longer. The FBI ran the profiles against CODIS, the national DNA database with more than 26 million genetic records. No match. The two people who left their DNA inside Nancy's home had never been arrested, never had their DNA entered into the federal system. They were unknown, but they existed. And the science that can identify people from their genetic material, even when they are not in any database, had already solved cases much colder than this one. The same technique that caught the Golden State Killer after 4 decades. The same technique that identified Brian Koberger in the Idaho student murders within weeks. Investigative genetic genealogy doesn't need the suspect in the system. It needs a relative, anyone sharing enough markers to trace a common ancestor on a public genealogy platform. The FBI knew exactly where the evidence needed to go. They requested it be sent to the National Crime Laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, the most advanced forensic facility in the country, with direct access to the genetic genealogy infrastructure that had solved decades-old cases. They were told no. Instead, Sheriff Nanos sent the evidence to DNA Labs International, a private lab in Deerfield Beach, Florida, with which Pima County had a long-standing contract. A federal official told Reuters this decision risked slowing a case that was already urgent by the minute. A source speaking to NewsNation was blunt. They called it dumb, called it insane. The Bureau would likely have to retrieve the evidence from Florida and start over, adding critical time to a process where time was the one thing Nancy Guthrie did not have. Pima County reportedly spent around $200,000 sending the evidence to that lab. Sheriff Nanos defended his decision publicly, saying he wanted all evidence in a single location alongside existing DNA profiles and markers for the family and others in the system, so comparisons could be properly cross-referenced. He emphatically denied blocking the FBI from anything. The FBI's perspective, according to multiple federal sources, told a different story. But the DNA decision wasn't the only way the investigation lost ground it could not recover. When deputies first processed Nancy Guthrie's front porch, the crime scene was released in under 20 hours. Reporters from Arizona's Family News walked to the front door and filmed the blood droplets on the porch. A nationally significant forensic environment, the very threshold from which an 84-year-old woman had been taken, was accessible to camera crews before the FBI had conducted a comprehensive sweep. Later, when asked if he would handle it differently, Nanos admitted, Monday morning quarterback, absolutely. I probably could have held off on that. A retired NYPD detective Michael Alcazar, adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, said investigators had probably dropped the ball by releasing the crime scene too early. Former Deputy Sheriff Richard Castigar Jr., who had served alongside Nanos for decades, told the Daily Mail the case should have been handed to federal authorities at least 2 weeks earlier. A Castigar described Nanos as a classic micromanager. Meanwhile, on February 2nd, Nanos had told the public there was no danger to the community, no cause for concern. 40 days later, in the NBC News interview where he claimed to know the motive from day one, he warned that the suspect could strike again, cautioning, "Don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe." Both of those statements came from the same man. And both cannot be reconciled without asking, what exactly did he know, when did he know it, and why did the gap between those two public positions stretch across 40 days of silence? The ransom notes arrived before most people had even heard Nancy Guthrie's name. The first note reached Cole News 13 in Tucson through the station's online tip portal on February 1st, the same day Nancy was reported missing. Then came a second note, then a third. Each one sent to a media outlet, never directly to the family. Each demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. Each set a deadline that passed without consequence. A FBI special agent in charge Hythe Janei confirmed publicly that two specific details in the notes had not been made public when they arrived. First, a reference to NY's Apple Watch and its exact location inside the home. Second, a reference to two broken floodlights in the backyard, dangling from wires, not visible from any public vantage point, and never mentioned in news coverage prior to the note. Both details were confirmed accurate. Both could only have been known by someone who had been inside that house. The notes were assessed as legitimate. Then, on February 5th and again on February 9th, the deadlines passed. The family publicly stated they were willing to pay. Savannah Guthrie recorded a video appeal coordinated with FBI negotiators, addressing whoever was holding her mother directly. Cameron Guthrie, a military pilot who had spoken almost nothing publicly throughout the ordeal, recorded his own appeal at the first deadline. $6 million was demanded. The money was available, but the person who had written notes with inside knowledge of a broken backyard floodlight and the exact placement of an Apple Watch inside Nancy Guthrie's home never wrote again. No proof of life. No instructions. No response to any appeal the family made. The silence was immediate and complete. On day 39, cadaver dogs were withdrawn from the search area. On day 41, the house was returned to the family after final forensic processing. The tip line remained open. The reward climbed past $1.2 million, then $2 million. The former FBI supervisory agent Steve Moore said publicly, "The only people who knew what happened were those who committed it. There was no outside witness waiting to come forward. This case would be solved not by a tip, but by forensic science." Beneath all of this, a question quietly built, one several former federal investigators circled without stating directly. Did the silence after the ransom deadlines mean what most people assumed, or something entirely different? Former FBI Deputy Assistant Director John Miller examined the evidence and said something most coverage treated as a sidebar. He concluded the crime went wrong immediately. Not days later, not after the ransom deadlines. The moment contact was made with Nancy Guthrie on the night of January 31st, something happened that could not be undone. What followed? The notes sent to media outlets, the Bitcoin demands, the inside knowledge carefully deployed in structured language. These may have been designed not to recover Nancy, but to cover what had already been done to her. Miller used a specific phrase. The crime may have been re-engineered into a kidnapping narrative after something went terribly and irrevocably wrong on that porch. A retired FBI special agent Jennifer Coffindaffer had tracked this case publicly from the moment it became news. She spoke to Newsweek, appeared across national broadcasts, and followed 41 days of developments, delays, and press conferences that contradicted each other. As she reported exactly what she saw, not what made for a better headline. On March 10, 2026, she wrote 3 words she had never used in 6 weeks of coverage: half glass full. She also noted that the search phase was over. She did not say Nancy had been found. In federal investigation language, that phrase carries a very specific meaning. And when law enforcement declines large-scale volunteer search operations, when units like the United St. John Navy or EC Search are turned away, it's rarely because a case has gone cold. It's because investigators already know something about the victim's location or condition that makes a ground search operationally irrelevant. The search phase ends when the investigation has already moved beyond the point where finding requires looking. Coffin Defer had spent her career learning to read the difference between a case that stalls and one building towards something the public cannot yet see. Former FBI agent and CIA officer Tracy Walder examined the same evidence from a different perspective. As she concluded the case was too targeted, someone had surveilled the house specifically, motivated not by Nancy Guthrie, but by Savannah Guthrie, the daughter. Nancy, in Walder's analysis, was not the true objective. She was the closest and most accessible connection to the person the alleged perpetrator actually cared about. Her age, limited mobility, predictable weekly routine, and her home of over 50 years made her the easiest point of access for someone whose real target lived elsewhere. 3 former federal investigators, 3 independent analytical frameworks, all pointing toward the same conclusion, one none of them stated outright, but one the evidence beneath each of their statements pointed toward directly. 48 days after Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker went silent at 2:28 a.m., the investigation had almost certainly shifted from a rescue operation to a prosecution. If you know someone following this case who deserves to understand what is happening beneath the press conferences, share this video. This is the version of the story the headlines haven't told. The forensic pipeline in this investigation is not a single track. It is parallel lines running simultaneously, each designed to reach the same destination from different directions. The DNA collected from inside Nancy's home is being processed through investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that does not require the suspect to have a criminal record. Investigative genetic genealogy needs a relative, anyone who shares enough genetic material to point toward a common ancestor in public databases like 23andMe or Ancestry. Forensic genealogists then build a family tree from that partial overlap, narrowing by geography, age, and physical description until they arrive at a specific individual. Barbara Ray Venter, the genealogist who identified the Golden State Killer, told CNN that patience is often required. Some cases break in less than 8 hours. Others take 2 years. This case is actively being worked. Cell tower data runs on a separate track. Any phone powered on and within range of a tower registers its presence with a timestamp, accessible to federal investigators with the proper warrant. Every device present in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood between the evening of January 31st and the early hours of February 1st left a record. A walkie-talkie carried by the alleged suspect wouldn't appear on towers, but the phone of whoever was driving the unidentified vehicle at 2:36 a.m. may have. The Black Ozark Trail backpack is sold exclusively at Walmart. The holster was also available there. FBI agents have been working with Walmart to trace purchases of that backpack model along the Leap Apollo path weeks before the abduction, and had shown images of the holster to gun stores across Tucson. Even a cash purchase generates a transaction log. Registers record the time. Store cameras record the buyer. According to reporting cited by Cold Case Files USA, an individual named Dominic Evans, described as a 19-year associate of Tommaso Cyan, has a documented history of felony convictions for burglary and robbery. Sources also report a physical profile that allegedly matches multiple points in the FBI's public description of the person seen on that porch. Height, build, a tattoo on the right wrist, a pinky ring. Evans has not been publicly named as a suspect or person of interest by law enforcement. That characterization remains alleged and unconfirmed. What is confirmed? Derek Kalla, arrested on February 5th for sending a fraudulent ransom text to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cyan's private numbers, had access to those exact numbers. His phone is now inside the federal evidence system. Every contact, every message across the relevant timeline is available to investigators who have been building a forensic and digital case across 6 weeks of parallel processing. Annie Guthrie's blue Honda CR-V was held in a federal evidence bay for over 40 days. According to a source speaking to Brian Enton, the delay was not because the vehicle was dismantled like Brian Koberger's car. The delay was due to an electronic data download during forensic processing that damaged the vehicle's onboard systems, requiring dealership repairs before it could be returned. The car is back, which means the extraction is complete. Everything the FBI needed from that vehicle is already in a case file beyond the collection phase. Here's what this case really teaches us. And it's worth slowing down to understand clearly because it applies far beyond Nancy Guthrie. When a federal kidnapping investigation involves both a local sheriff's department and the FBI, the question of who controls the physical evidence is not administrative, it is forensic. A DNA Labs International in Florida is a legitimate facility that has solved cold cases and performs credible work. But the FBI's National Crime Laboratory at Quantico is built around a specific infrastructure: direct integration with investigative genetic genealogy pipelines, computational tools for resolving complex mixed DNA profiles, and institutional relationships with genealogy databases that make the technique work at speed. When evidence bypasses that infrastructure, it doesn't become unprocessable, it becomes slower. In a case where the victim was 84 years old, had a pacemaker, and required daily cardiac medication, slower was not neutral. This case also teaches us about predatory targeting. The alleged suspect visited Nancy Guthrie's property on January 11th without equipment, then returned on January 24th, both times on a weekend, a deliberate pattern of surveillance that set the stage for what would follow. According to sources speaking to Brian Anton and Fox News, the pattern of casing on weekend nights, targeting a single elderly woman with a predictable routine in a quiet neighborhood, reflects what criminologists call low-risk victim selection combined with high-effort pre-operational planning. That combination is significant. It means the alleged perpetrator was neither impulsive nor inexperienced. If Jennifer Coffendaffer's analysis is correct, the walkie-talkie indicates there was coordination. Understanding that profile, methodical, pre-planned, multi-person, is the difference between treating this as an isolated tragedy and recognizing what former FBI agent Tracy Walder warned. This case was too targeted to be random. And Nancy Guthrie's cardiac medication was still sitting on the kitchen counter when deputies arrived at 12:15 p.m. on February 1st. Her Apple Watch was on the counter. Her phone was on the counter. She did not pack. She did not choose to leave. 50 years in that house, and she left without a single personal item. The science is running. The genealogy is being built. Cell tower records exist. Somewhere in this country, a person is living with the knowledge of what happened in those 41 minutes, watching the reward climb past $1.2 million, seeing the FBI return to that neighborhood week after week, and calculating whether silence is still the right decision. The tip line is 1800-CAFBI. Tips can also be submitted at tips.fbi.gov. Both options are completely anonymous. If this breakdown gave you insight the headlines did not, hit like. It takes 1 second and shows that digging this deep is worth doing again. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when this case moves, we'll be here with the full story before anyone else. And if you want to dive into the physical evidence tied to the alleged suspect, specifically what the FBI's description tells us and what it still leaves open, that video is next. The picture is more detailed than the news has been willing to share. I'll see you there.